When the police arrived that night, they found chaos, a crime no one wanted to believe, and a child too small to explain it. But sitting quietly in the corner, guarding that little girl as if the world depended on it, was a German shepherd named Rex. He didn't run. He didn't bark. He simply waited until the little girl placed her hand on his head and whispered softly, "I want justice for Grandma." That whisper began a journey that would change lives, one that would take them from a courtroom full of tears to a stage of honor years later, where the same dog would stand proudly in his K9 vest, a medal gleaming at his neck. This is their story, a story of pain transformed into purpose, of loss reborn as love. Because sometimes, the truest heroes don't seek justice for themselves. They simply stand beside those who need it, and never walk away. The town lay wrapped in a soft mist that evening, a sleepy pocket of the eastern countryside where the sound of rain on rooftops was the only thing that dared to disturb the quiet. Streetlights flickered against the haze, painting halos in the fog. In the middle of that stillness stood a modest wooden house, its porch light glowing like a small heart beating in the darkness. Inside, warmth lived. The scent of butter and sugar drifted through the kitchen as a grandmother leaned over an old oven, pulling out a tray of cookies. Her laughter, that light, gentle kind, mingled with the crackling of firewood. Near her feet, a little girl giggled, flour dusting her cheeks as she reached up to hand her grandmother a wooden spoon. "Can I try stirring, Grandma?" the child asked, her voice innocent and bright. The grandmother smiled, her wrinkles folding like paper fans. "Sure, my angel, but stir gently, or you'll get flour all over the house." The girl laughed, the kind of laugh that feels like sunlight breaking through a cloudy day. Rex, the family's German shepherd, lay curled by the fireplace. His thick coat shimmered under the orange glow, and every now and then his ears twitched at the rumble of distant thunder. He was a magnificent creature, noble, watchful, and gentle with the child who often clung to him like a plush toy. To her, he wasn't just a dog. He was her guardian. The grandmother hummed softly, an old lullaby that had survived generations. The rhythm matched the patter of rain on the window panes, forming a kind of music that belonged to this small corner of the world. The girl began to hum along, her voice a high, wavering echo of her grandmother's tune. Outside, the night deepened. Rain turned heavier, its rhythm growing impatient, pressing against the glass. Time towels on 500 bombs. Trees swayed under the weight of the wind. Yet inside that humble home, warmth persisted, as if love itself had built the walls. The narrator might have said, this was what peace looked like, fragile, fleeting, unaware of its own expiration date. In the living room, Rex lifted his head. His nose twitched. Something outside disturbed him. He stood, padding quietly toward the front window, his breath fogging the glass. The girl noticed. "What is it, Rex?" she whispered, clutching her small stuffed bear. He didn't bark, just stared into the blur of rain beyond the porch light. The grandmother followed his gaze and chuckled. "It's probably just the neighbor's cat." But even as she said it, a small furrow appeared between her brows. The girl tugged her sleeve. "Grandma, will Mom come home tomorrow?" There was a pause, the kind that carries more weight than words. The grandmother smiled faintly, hiding the heaviness in her chest. "Maybe, if it doesn't rain heavily." The little girl's face lit up. "I miss you so much, Mom." Rex let out a low, uncertain sound, as if he too remembered something about that name, something that didn't smell quite right. The clock ticked toward 8. The cookies cooled on the counter. The grandmother poured 2 mugs of warm milk. The girl curled up on the couch with her blanket, her tiny feet tucked under Rex's belly. The fire snapped softly, shadows dancing across the walls like silent storytellers. The grandmother sat beside them, her gaze tender. For a fleeting moment, the world outside ceased to exist. There was only this, love contained within 4 creaking walls, wrapped in the illusion of safety. Then came the first crack of thunder. It rolled across the sky like an angry god, and Rex lifted his head sharply, ears pricked. The lights flickered once, twice, before steadying again. The girl stirred but didn't wake. The grandmother whispered a prayer under her breath, the kind old people say when storms remind them of how small they really are. Minutes passed. The storm thickened. The sound of rain grew wild, no longer gentle but desperate. And then, through that chaos, another sound cut in, the slow approach of tires on wet gravel. Headlights. 2 beams of light sliced through the mist, crawling up the long driveway. They illuminated the fence, the old mailbox, the porch steps, then stopped. Rex stood immediately, a low growl rumbling in his chest. His tail stiffened. The grandmother's heart clenched. She moved to the window, parting the curtain just enough to see the outline of a dark sedan. The engine idled for a moment, before going quiet. The girl stirred on the couch, rubbing her eyes. "Who is it, ma'am?" The grandmother didn't answer right away. Her hand trembled on the curtain. She saw 2 figures through the rain, a man and a woman, stepping out into the storm. The woman's coat clung to her like a shadow. Her hair, matted and soaked, hid her face. The man walked beside her, tall and silent, the glow of a cigarette briefly illuminating his hard expression. The grandmother's lips parted. No words, just air. Rex's growl deepened. The woman lifted her head toward the house, and for an instant, lightning revealed her face. Pale, tired, eyes hollowed by something darker than exhaustion. Her daughter's mother. The grandmother's heart sank. It had been months since she'd last seen her. Months of unanswered calls and excuses that didn't fit. Now she stood there, in the middle of a storm, with a man the grandmother had never trusted. "Grandma, is Mom home?" the little girl whispered, hope trembling in her voice. The grandmother forced a smile. "Yes, Mom is home." But her tone carried unease. She placed a hand on Rex's collar. "Take it easy, Rex." Outside, the man and the woman exchanged a few words. The grandmother couldn't hear over the storm. Then, without knocking, the woman reached for the doorknob. Rex tensed. The grandmother stood still, torn between love and fear. She wanted to open her arms, to believe the darkness had been left outside. But the way the woman's eyes avoided hers, the way the man's hand stayed inside his coat pocket, made her stomach twist. The door creaked open. Cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of rain, mud, and something faintly metallic. The grandmother whispered a name that dissolved into the thunder. The girl, now wide awake, called out softly, "Mommy?" For a heartbeat, silence stretched, a fragile thread between the storm outside and the storm that had just entered their home. The narrator's voice, soft, trembling, might have said, "Sometimes the darkest nights don't arrive with screams or sirens. They begin with a familiar face at the door." Rex stepped forward, standing between the child and the 2 adults, his eyes locked on the man. The grandmother, holding her breath, knew, deep down, that peace had just taken its last breath. Outside, the wind howled, the headlights cut off, and the house, that small, warm world of laughter and cookies, stood trembling on the edge of a silence that would never be the same again. The rain had turned violent, It struck the roof like fists, rattling the gutters, and washing away every trace of peace that had lingered only an hour before. The lights flickered again, dimming, as if even electricity dared not witness what was coming. Inside the house, tension thickened the air, invisible, but suffocating. The grandmother stood in the kitchen doorway, her eyes darting between her daughter and the stranger beside her. The man's presence seemed to drain warmth from the room. His clothes were soaked, his jaw tight, and in his eyes burned something that wasn't just anger. It was desperation. "What are you doing here at this hour?" The grandmother's voice broke the silence. The daughter didn't answer. Her lips trembled, her gaze unfocused, like someone half awake in a nightmare. Rex growled again, stepping forward, but the grandmother placed a hand on his back. "Calm down," she whispered, though her hand, cold and damp, betrayed her own fear. The man took a slow step forward. "We just need a place to stay," he muttered, his tone sharp, impatient. "Just one night." The grandmother hesitated. Her instincts screamed no, but her love, that blind, endless love a mother has for her child, overpowered everything else. "Okay, just one night." The girl peeked from behind the sofa, her small fingers gripping the fabric. "Me," she whispered. The woman's eyes flicked to her daughter, and for the briefest moment, something human flickered there. Shame, love, pain. Then it was gone. Dinner was silent. The rain was the only sound. The grandmother tried to act normal, offering them warm food, but the man refused. He paced near the window, phone in hand, muttering under his breath. The daughter sat still, hands trembling in her lap. When the lightning flashed again, Rex barked, sharp, protective. The man spun around. "Control that damn dog!" "Rex is family." Grandmother replied firmly, but her courage was thin. Minutes dragged on like hours. The girl, sensing something terribly wrong, clung to her grandmother's dress. "Grandma, I'm scared." "It's okay," the grandmother whispered. "Rex is here." But she was lying. She could feel it, the way the man's eyes moved around the house, scanning, calculating. The way her daughter avoided looking at her, something had followed them here. Something more dangerous than the storm. Then came the argument. Low voices first, then louder. "You promised me," the man's voice thundered. "You said she had money, that she'd help." "She doesn't have it," the daughter cried back. "I told you, I just needed time." The grandmother froze in the hallway, heart hammering. "Money? What are you talking about?" The man turned, fury igniting his face. "Stay out of this, old woman." Rex stepped between them, teeth bared. "Brother, don't do that," the daughter begged, tears streaming. "Please." But the man was beyond reason. He slammed his hand against the table. A plate crashed to the floor. The child screamed, covering her ears. "Grandma, run!" the daughter cried. But it was too late. Chaos, shouting, breaking glass, the heavy sound of struggle. The grandmother's scream pierced through the thunder outside. "Stop, please," Rex barked wildly now, pulling against the little girl's grip. She tried to hold him, sobbing, hiding beneath the bed, as her grandmother's cries turned into muffled pleading. Then, a single sickening thud, and silence. The girl's breath caught. Her body froze. Rex pressed close to her, trembling but alert. The only sound now was rain. Endless, merciless rain. From under the bed, she saw a shadow move. Her mother, crumpled on the floor, hands shaking, staring at what she had done. The man stood over the scene, his breathing ragged. "Now we're even," he muttered, tossing something metallic onto the counter. The light flickered, revealing the object, a kitchen knife. The daughter sobbed. "What have you done?" He didn't answer. "Time, 1500 pems." He grabbed his coat, shoving the door open. Cold air swept in. "Clean it up," he said, "or you're next." Then he was gone. The woman fell to her knees beside the lifeless body of her mother. Her screams were swallowed by the storm. "Mom, I'm sorry. I don't want to." Her voice cracked, collapsing under the weight of grief and horror. Under the bed, the little girl pressed her hands over her mouth. Her tears soaked Rex's fur. The dog growled softly, ready to protect her if anyone came near. The woman's cries grew softer, breaking into hysterical whispers. "I didn't mean to. He made me. He said he'd hurt her." Rex moved slightly, his nose brushing against the floorboards, ears twitching. He wanted to go to her, but the girl's small hand held tight to his neck. "Shh," she whispered through sobs. "Shh, Rex. Don't bark." Her voice was barely there, fragile as glass. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Time lost meaning. The woman eventually stumbled out of the house, her sobs fading into the storm. The girl stayed hidden, trembling, unable to move. The smell of cookies still lingered in the air, sweet and cruel, a reminder of what was lost. The fire in the hearth had died down to embers. In its glow, Rex's eyes glimmered like molten amber. He nudged the girl's shoulder, as if to ask, "Now what?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. Outside, faint lights began to flash, red and blue cutting through the rain. The wail of sirens echoed up the street, growing louder. The girl crawled out from under the bed on shaking legs. Her feet touched something cold. She looked down, then quickly away, burying her face in Rex's neck. "Grandma," she whispered, voice breaking. "Grandma, wake up." But there was no answer. Rex licked her cheek, whining softly. His breath was warm, alive, the only proof she wasn't completely alone. He stayed beside her as the door burst open. Officers flooding in, shouting, lights flashing. A policewoman knelt down, wrapping a blanket around the girl. But the child didn't let go of Rex. She held onto him like a lifeline, her tiny fingers gripping his fur until her knuckles turned white. As they carried her out, Rex followed, silent, loyal, unbroken. Behind them, the grandmother's house, once filled with laughter, stood dark and hollow. The storm finally eased into a whisper, and from somewhere deep within that whisper, a voice seemed to echo, soft, maternal, eternal. "I'm still here, my dear. Don't be afraid." The little girl turned her head slightly, eyes red and wide. "Grandma?" Rex pressed his nose into her hand, refusing to leave. The sirens wailed one last time, fading into the night. Carrying with them the sound of innocence lost, love shattered, and the first fragile spark of justice waiting to be born. Morning broke reluctantly over the small town, pale light fighting through the bruised sky, struggling to wash away the night's horror. The storm had passed, but the earth still wept. Rainwater pooled in the streets, reflecting flashes of red and blue from the police cars that crowded the narrow lane. Inside the modest house, chaos lingered in silence. The scent of wet wood mixed with something metallic, sharp, the kind that stayed in the back of the throat long after one left the room. Officers moved quietly, their footsteps muffled, their eyes heavy. Crime scene tape fluttered in the wind, its yellow color glaringly out of place in this once gentle neighborhood. In the living room, a young officer stood by the fireplace where the embers had long gone cold. A tray of cookies sat untouched on the counter, a cruel relic of a night that had begun with laughter. Outside, on the porch steps, sat a little girl wrapped in a large gray blanket. Her eyes were red-rimmed, unfocused, lost somewhere between terror and disbelief. She didn't cry anymore. Her tears had run dry hours ago. Her small hands clutched a photograph, her grandmother smiling, holding her close. Beside her, Rex sat stiff and silent, his fur still damp from the rain. His gaze never left the front door, as if waiting for the woman who had left to return. The mother, who had vanished into the night. His body trembled slightly, but his eyes stayed sharp, protective. Whenever an officer walked too close, his muscles tensed. Ready. A paramedic approached carefully. "She hasn't said a word since we got here," he murmured to the detective beside him. "Just holds that photo and the dog. Won't let either go." Detective Harper, a man in his 50s, with eyes that carried years of tragedy, crouched near the girl. His voice softened, careful not to startle her. "Hey, sweetheart," he said quietly. "My name's Sam. You're safe now, okay? No one's going to hurt you." The girl didn't respond. She stared straight ahead, her lips pressed together, trembling slightly. Rex's ears flicked toward the detective, his gaze narrowing. Harper extended his hand slowly, not toward the girl, but toward Rex. "Good boy," he murmured softly. "You've been brave, huh?" Rex didn't growl. Instead, he leaned forward just enough to sniff the man's fingers, then sat back down. It was permission, silent but clear. Harper turned his attention back to the girl. "What do you see happening, honey?" His voice carried both gentleness and gravity, the tone of a man who'd spoken to too many broken children. The girl blinked, her small fingers tightening around the photograph until it bent. She looked down at it, at her grandmother's smile, and finally whispered, her voice hoarse, "I want justice for her." The words hung in the air like a prayer. The room behind them fell utterly still. The officer taking notes paused mid-sentence. The forensic team outside stopped their quiet chatter. Even the wind seemed to hush. Harper swallowed hard. He wasn't a man who cried easily, but something in that child's voice cracked the armor he'd built over decades. He nodded slowly. "We'll get it, sweetheart. I promise you, we will." The girl didn't move, didn't blink. She just sat there, staring into the distance, as if trying to find her grandmother in the folds of morning light. Rex pressed closer, resting his chin gently on her knee. An older female officer approached. Her steps were light, her expression soft. She knelt beside the girl and wrapped another blanket around her shoulders. "Do you want something warm to drink, honey? Some cocoa, maybe?" The girl didn't answer, but her small hand reached out, clutching the officer's sleeve. Not to ask for comfort, but to anchor herself to something solid in a world that had just fallen apart. Harper stood slowly, rubbing his face. "Get her to the station," he said softly to the paramedic. "I'll meet you there once the scene's secure." Hours later, the station buzzed with quiet urgency. Phones rang, papers shuffled, and the steady hum of rain against the windows filled the spaces between conversations. In one corner of the room, the little girl sat on a long bench, wrapped in a dry blanket. A cup of hot chocolate rested untouched in her lap. Rex lay beside her, feet, his head resting on his paws, eyes fixed on the main door. Every time it opened, he looked up, hopeful, but it was never her mother. The detective entered, carrying a soft expression and a folder tucked under his arm. He crouched again in front of her, trying to meet her eyes. "You're safe here, sweetheart. Rex, too. He's a strong one." The girl finally looked at him. Her eyes were deep pools of confusion and loss. "Where is your mother?" she asked, barely audible. Harper exhaled slowly. "We're looking for her. The people who hurt your grandma. We'll find them. But right now, I need your help. Can you tell me what you saw?" Her lips trembled. She looked down at her cup, then at the photo again. Her grandmother's face smiled back, frozen in time. The words she'd been holding back pressed at her throat, fighting to get out. "There was shouting," she whispered. "He was angry." Mother and child cried. Then she fell down. Her voice broke. She pressed the photo to her chest, eyes flooding with tears that finally returned after hours of emptiness. Harper gently placed a hand over hers. "That's enough. You did good, sweetheart. You're so brave." Rex lifted his head, sensing the emotion, and nudged her elbow with his nose. The girl turned to him, her tears falling into his fur as she hugged him tightly. He didn't move, just let her cry, his deep brown eyes glistening in the fluorescent light. Across the room, another officer watched quietly. He'd seen countless cases, robberies, assaults, murders, but this was different. This was a child who had lost everything and still had the courage to ask for justice. The officer stepped forward, his rough hands hesitating before reaching down to scratch behind Rex's ear. "You did good too, boy," he murmured. Rex closed his eyes, letting out a small sigh, the first sign of calm since the night began. The entire room seemed to soften. The harsh fluorescent light felt warmer. The tension in the air thinned, replaced by something fragile but pure. Hope. The girl looked up at Harper again, her voice small but steady now. "Are you in heaven?" The detective swallowed hard before answering. "Yes, and I'm proud of you, because you were brave." She nodded slowly, her hand tightening on Rex's fur. In that moment, in a room filled with reports, evidence, and grief, something shifted. The story was no longer just about tragedy. It became about endurance, about the light that flickers, even in the darkest corners of the world. Harper stood, giving the child one last gentle look. "We'll find her," he promised. "You and Rex. You've already helped us more than you know." As he walked away, the girl turned her eyes back to the window. The sun had finally broken through the clouds, faint but golden, reflecting off the puddles outside. She leaned against Rex and whispered softly, "Grandma, I did it." Rex wagged his tail once, quietly, as if he understood. And for the first time since that terrible night, the little girl let herself believe. Maybe, just maybe, the world could be kind again. The gray of dawn had faded into a pale blue sky, but inside the police station, the world was still heavy with shadows. Files stacked high on desks, phones buzzed endlessly, and the air was thick with the sound of whispered updates. The crime that had shaken the small town was no longer just a headline. It was now a slow, painful unraveling of truth. Detective Harper sat in the interrogation room, his tired eyes fixed on the woman across from him. She looked smaller than the photo they'd seen in the file, shoulders hunched, hair matted, eyes hollow. Her hands trembled on the table, cuffed, but loose, as if even the steel didn't want to touch her. The mother. For hours she'd been silent, staring at the one-way mirror, as if expecting a ghost to look back. But when Harper placed a photo of her daughter on the table, the dam inside her cracked. She saw it, didn't she? The woman whispered, her voice hoarse. My baby saw everything. Harper didn't answer. He simply slid the photo closer, the one of the girl wrapped in a blanket, Rex by her side, eyes filled with too much loss for a child her age. The woman's face twisted in pain. I didn't mean to. I didn't want to. He made me. Her voice broke, tears spilling freely now. He said if I didn't do it, he'd hurt her. He'd hurt my little girl. The camera in the corner blinked red, recording every word, but the room itself felt frozen in time. Tell me about him, Harper said softly. Her lips quivered. He wasn't like that at first, she whispered. He was kind, gentle, said he'd take care of me and my daughter. But then the debts came. The lies. The shouting. Her hands clenched into fists. He took everything. My money, my friends, my choices. He said I was worthless without him. She looked up, eyes wild with memory. And I believed him. The detective leaned back, letting her speak. Sometimes, truth came not from questions, but from silence. Time 700 plum. He'd lock me in the room for hours, she continued. Said he was teaching me a lesson. He'd take my phone, read my messages, told me I was lucky he even stayed. I tried to leave once, just once, but he found us. He said if I ever tried again, he'd come for her. She pressed her cuffed hands to her chest, gasping for air. So I stayed. God help me, I stayed. Harper exchanged a look with the young officer beside him, a silent mix of pity and frustration. This was no simple case of guilt. It was a web of cruelty and control that had wrapped around a family until it strangled the light out of them. He slid another photo forward. The boyfriend, captured on a security camera at a gas station, just hours before the murder. Where is he now? Her eyes hardened. Gone. He said he'd disappear before anyone could find him. She stared at the photo for a long time, her breathing uneven. Then she whispered, he said I had to choose between my mother and my daughter. Harper's jaw tightened. And you believed him? She looked up, tears burning down her cheeks. When you've been told you're nothing for so long, you start to believe it. And when someone like him says he'll hurt your child, you don't think, you beg, you obey. Her voice broke completely. I didn't want to hurt her. I swear to God I didn't. But I thought, maybe if I just did what he said, maybe he'd stop. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Harper had heard countless confessions in his career, but this one cut differently. There was guilt in her voice, yes, but beneath it, a haunting note of survival. The camera's red light blinked again. The tape would show tears, broken words, a woman destroyed by her own choices. But no recording could capture the years that led to that night, the bruises no one saw, the whispered apologies, the fear that had become her oxygen. Weeks later, the courtroom was filled to capacity. The trial had drawn reporters, neighbors, even strangers who wanted to look grief in the eye and understand it. But what they saw was something far more complex. Time 12s. At the center of it all, sat a little girl, in a pale blue dress, legs barely reaching the floor. Rex lay quietly at her feet, his head resting on his paws, tail thumping softly whenever she shifted in her chair. His presence was the anchor in her storm. The mother sat at the defense table, her wrists free, but her spirit bound. Her eyes darted toward her daughter again and again, desperate, pleading. But the girl never met her gaze. The judge called for silence. The prosecutor stepped forward gently, careful not to tower over the small figure on the stand. "Sweetheart," he said softly, "can you tell us what happened that night?" The courtroom held its breath. Cameras clicked faintly. Pens froze above paper. The girl swallowed hard, her small hand gripping Rex's leash. "There was shouting," she whispered. And Grandma said stop." Her voice trembled, each word costing her courage. Then it got quiet. Too quiet. She looked down, tears welling. Rex nuzzled her knee, as if reminding her she wasn't alone. "And your mother?" the prosecutor asked softly. The child hesitated, glancing at the defense table. Her mother's face was streaked with tears, lips trembling as she mouthed, "I'm sorry." "She cried too," the girl finally said. "After it happened, she held Grandma and said sorry, again and again. She didn't want to. I think she was scared." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Even the hardest faces softened. Harper watched from the back row, arms crossed, jaw tight. This was the moment the story changed. The audience had come expecting a villain, but what they found was a family, broken by fear and manipulation. The prosecutor nodded gently. "Thank you, sweetheart. You've been very brave." The girl wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "I just want justice for Grandma," she said. The same words she'd whispered that morning in the station. The judge cleared his throat, eyes glassy. "You've done well, young lady," he said, voice barely steady. "You've done more than anyone your age should ever have to do." The mother broke into sobs. "I'm sorry," she cried, voice cracking. "I'm so sorry." For a long moment, the courtroom was silent, except for the sound of her crying, a raw, human sound that blurred the lines between guilt and grief. Rex lifted his head and let out a low, mournful whine. Not loud, not sharp, just enough to echo through the room like a living heartbeat. In that instant, no one saw criminals or victims, only a family, shattered by darkness, trying to crawl toward the light. The little girl reached down, her fingers brushing through Rex's fur, grounding herself once more. And though the world around her felt too big, too cruel, she sat tall, her grandmother's courage flickering in her eyes. The courthouse stood like a monument to judgment, gray, solemn, surrounded by a swarm of flashing cameras. Reporters shouted questions into the cold morning air. Microphones raised like weapons. Headlines had already named it, the daughter's choice. Across the nation, people argued. Was the mother a monster? Or another victim, lost to abuse? Inside, the air was heavy with tension. Every seat in the courtroom was filled, journalists scribbling furiously, neighbors whispering in disbelief, police officers lining the walls. The hum of conversation felt like a storm waiting to break. Detective Harper sat in the back row, his expression carved from stone. He'd seen outrage before, the way society demanded simple villains for complex tragedies. But he knew this case had no such simplicity. It was a fracture in the human heart, a war between fear and love. At the defense table, the mother sat still, her face pale under the harsh lights. Her wrists trembled as she gripped the edge of the table, eyes darting to the door again and again. She looked nothing like the headlines described, not cold or calculating, but hollowed out, as if guilt had eaten away her soul. Her lawyer, a woman named Caroline Yates, stood to address the court. Her voice was calm, but carried the quiet force of conviction. "Your Honor, members of the jury," she began, "my client does not deny her actions. She confesses to what happened. But what we must ask today is why. Why does a woman who loved her mother and adored her daughter commit the unthinkable?" Murmurs rippled through the gallery. The prosecutor, Douglas Reeve, frowned, but didn't interrupt. Yates continued, pacing slowly before the jury. For years, she lived under psychological captivity, manipulated, beaten, isolated. She was told she was worthless, that she had no power, no voice, no choice. When someone is broken down long enough, they no longer see the difference between obedience and survival. She gestured toward her client. That is what abuse does. It rewires love into fear. The mother lowered her eyes, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. Reeve stood, buttoning his jacket with deliberate precision. "Abuse is tragic," he said, voice cold, sharp, "but it cannot excuse murder. A mother is dead. A child is traumatized for life. There is no justification for taking an innocent life, especially one who raised you." He turned toward the jury, eyes blazing. "If we allow sympathy to overshadow justice, then what message do we send? That fear can excuse violence? That manipulation absolves guilt? No. The line must hold. Justice must stand." His words landed like blows. The spectators stirred, divided. Some nodded in agreement, others shifted uneasily. Harper clenched his jaw. He'd heard enough speeches about justice. What no one seemed to understand was that sometimes justice wasn't clean. It bled. Then came the part no one was ready for, the child's testimony. The bailiff opened the side door, and the little girl stepped in, holding Rex's leash with both hands. The courtroom fell into silence. Even the air vents seemed to fade. She was small, smaller than the wooden chair she was led to. Her shoes tapped softly on the tile as she walked, every camera lens following her, like a fragile thread of truth. Rex walked beside her, calm, steady, eyes scanning the room. The judge leaned forward. "Sweetheart," he said gently, "are you ready to speak?" The girl nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." The prosecutor approached first. His tone softened. "Can you tell us what you remember from that night?" The child hesitated. Her fingers twisted the leash until her knuckles turned white. She looked down at Rex, who nudged her knee with his nose. A silent promise. "I'm here." "There was shouting," she said softly, "and breaking. I heard Grandma cry, then she didn't make any more sounds." The room held its breath. "And your mother?" the prosecutor asked. The girl's eyes lifted, toward the woman at the defense table. Her mother, trembling, eyes filled with tears she didn't dare wipe away. The little girl's lip quivered. "She was crying too," she said. "She said sorry. A lot." Reeve nodded gravely. "And what do you want, sweetheart?" Her answer came after a long silence, each word trembling, but clear enough to cut through the air like glass. "Mom was wrong," she said, "but Grandma didn't deserve to die. I just want justice." Her voice cracked on the last word, and the sound shattered the courtroom's composure. Reporters forgot their pens. Jurors looked down. Even Reeve froze, his polished rhetoric collapsing under the weight of her truth. The judge lowered his eyes, removing his glasses. "That's enough," he said softly. "You've done very well." The girl nodded, tears brimming. Rex pressed his head against her leg, steadying her as she sniffled quietly. Then, from the defense table, the mother broke. "Baby," she whispered, voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry. I love you." The child turned toward her. "Mom." Confusion and sorrow warring in her face. She didn't speak. She just looked at her mother for a long, painful moment before clutching Rex's fur again. Yates rose. "Your Honor, may we request a recess?" The judge nodded. "Granted." His voice wavered slightly. As the court adjourned, whispers swelled. Reporters rushed to capture what had just unfolded, cameras clicking like distant thunder. But for those inside, the noise meant nothing. Harper remained in his seat, eyes fixed on the little girl as she left the stand. In her innocence, she had done what neither attorney, nor jury, nor judge could do. She had spoken a truth untouched by bias or law. Time tuamos, the kind of truth that doesn't ask for punishment or forgiveness, only understanding. Outside, the media would twist her words into headlines. But inside that silent chamber, where one child's voice had pierced the noise of adult deceit, something sacred had been laid bare. The human cost of fear and the fragile shape of justice. As the girl disappeared behind the wooden door, Rex glanced back once at the room full of broken adults, as if to say, "You've heard her. Now do right by her." And then he followed her out, tail low but steady, the quiet embodiment of loyalty, in a world still learning what that word truly meant. The final day of the trial dawned gray and cold, as if the sky itself refused to celebrate what was about to happen. Outside the courthouse, news vans lined the streets, their antennas piercing the fog. Reporters murmured rehearsed openings, waiting to capture the verdict that would either heal or divide. Inside, the air was heavy, thick with the weight of everything said and everything left unsaid. The mother sat motionless at the defense table, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white, her hair pulled back, revealing eyes hollowed by sleepless nights. Every whisper, every click of a pen, seemed to echo too loudly. At the front, the judge took his seat, robes swaying with quiet gravity. The jury filed in, faces solemn, carrying the burden of judgment like an invisible chain. Detective Harper stood near the back again, hat in hand, gaze fixed on the little girl in the front row. She sat beside a social worker, small legs dangling from the bench. Rex lay at her feet, tail still, body alert. The judge's voice cut through the stillness. "Will the defendant please rise?" The mother stood, trembling. The foreman's voice quivered as he read, "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of manslaughter in the first degree, with mitigating circumstances." The words hung like smoke, dense, lingering. There was no gasp from the gallery this time, no murmur of outrage, only silence, a silence that carried grief, relief, and pity, all at once. The judge cleared his throat. Given the evidence, and the context of psychological coercion and abuse, the court sentences the defendant to 15 years imprisonment, with eligibility for parole after 10. The gavel struck once, a single hollow sound, marking the end of one story and the beginning of another. The mother collapsed back into her seat, sobbing uncontrollably. Her lawyer placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, whispering words no one could hear. Across the room, the child flinched at the sound of the gavel, a sound too close to a slammed door, too final. Officers approached quietly. The metallic click of handcuffs filled the room. The mother lifted her head, tears streaking down her face. "Please," she choked out. "Just one more look, please." The judge hesitated, then nodded once. The bailiff stepped aside. The mother turned, her eyes finding her daughter. For a moment, the world shrank. No reporters, no courtroom, no sentence. Just a mother and a child, bound by love and tragedy. "My daughter," she whispered through tears. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The little girl stared back, her small hands gripping Rex's leash. She didn't fully understand what was happening, only that the woman who had once tucked her into bed was being taken away. And though every adult in the room saw guilt and consequence, the child saw something else: heartbreak. Her lip trembled. She wanted to run to her mother, but her feet wouldn't move. The social worker held her hand gently. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered. "You can say goodbye." The girl stood slowly, her voice small. "Me." The mother's knees buckled as the officers guided her toward the exit. She tried to smile through her tears, shaking her head. "Don't come close, baby. Just remember, I love you, always." Rex, who had been silent the entire trial, suddenly rose. His ears shot up, muscles tense. Then he barked, once, sharp, piercing. The sound cut through the chamber, like a cry from the soul. The echo lingered. Everyone froze. Even the officers stopped mid-step. The sound wasn't just a bark. It was a protest, a farewell, a declaration that no bond, not even justice, could sever the invisible thread between the girl, her grandmother, and the woman being led away. The child covered her mouth, tears spilling freely now. The mother sobbed harder, collapsing against the guards. "Tell her I'm sorry," she cried. "Tell her I never wanted this." The officers nodded quietly, leading her down the aisle. The girl watched, small shoulders shaking, until the heavy doors closed, and the echo of footsteps faded. Silence returned. For a long time, no one moved. The judge sat motionless, the papers before him blurred by tears he tried to hide. Reporters lowered their cameras. Even Harper, hardened by years of loss, found himself unable to look away from the small figure standing alone at the front. The social worker knelt beside the girl. "It's over now," she whispered. But the girl shook her head. "No," she said softly. "It's not over." She turned to Rex, knelt beside him, and wrapped her arms around his neck. He pressed into her embrace, his fur soaking up her tears. For the first time since the trial began, she let herself cry. Really cry. Not the quiet tears of confusion, but the deep sobs that come from understanding too much, too soon. Harper stepped forward, his voice low. "You're very brave, kiddo. Your grandmother would be proud." The girl didn't answer. She just whispered into Rex's fur, her voice trembling. "Why does justice hurt so much?" The detective's throat tightened. He didn't have an answer. Maybe no one did. After a moment, the girl wiped her eyes and stood. Her hands found the photo of her grandmother, creased and faded now, from too much holding. She looked at it, then at the door where her mother had vanished. There was love there still, raw, confused, but real. She didn't hate her mother. She didn't even fully blame her. Somewhere in her young heart, she understood what the adults could not, that love and pain sometimes lived in the same house, wearing the same face. She bent down once more, hugged Rex tightly. The courtroom lights glinted off his fur, and in his calm brown eyes was something like wisdom, the kind that doesn't speak, only stays. Outside, the sky began to clear. Sunlight broke weakly through the clouds, pouring through the tall windows, landing on the floor at the girl's feet, a single, golden beam that cut through the gray. She stood in it, breathing slowly, letting it warm her face. Then she whispered, so softly it was almost lost in the hum of the world returning to normal. "We'll be okay, Rex." The dog let out a quiet whine and leaned into her side. And for a moment, the courtroom, the place where judgment had been delivered and hearts had been broken, felt almost peaceful. Not because the pain had vanished, but because in that fragile light, acceptance had begun to take root. Seasons shifted quietly in the small town, as if time itself had decided to tread softly over the wounds it left behind. The courthouse whispers faded, the news vans disappeared, and the world fought on. Or at least, pretended to. But not everyone could forget. For a long time after the trial, Rex lived in a kind of limbo. The police had kept him temporarily, uncertain of what to do with the dog, who had been both witness and guardian. He wasn't just a pet anymore. He was evidence of loyalty, trauma, and love entwined. Yet every officer who looked into those amber eyes saw something too human to ignore: grief, and the will to survive it. Detective Harper was the one who made the call. "Let's bring him into the K9 program," he said. "He's already proven what he's capable of: protecting, enduring, loving, even after the world fell apart." And so it began. The first day of training dawned beneath a bright, forgiving sky. The police compound stretched wide, a fenced field of green, dotted with cones and training dummies. Rex stood at the entrance, a handler kneeling beside him, leash firm, but gentle. He was older than most recruits, scarred by the past, but his stance was steady, his gaze focused. "Sit," the handler commanded. Rex obeyed instantly. "Stay." He didn't move. From the observation area, Harper watched with quiet pride. He'd seen dozens of K9 trainees, some fast, some fierce, but none with the kind of silent dignity this one carried. It wasn't just obedience. It was purpose reborn. Days turned into weeks, and Rex adapted quickly. He learned hand signals, voice commands, tracking drills, when his handler threw a scent cloth into the wind. Rex's nose twitched, and he sprinted across the field with unyielding focus, tail cutting through the air like a flag. Each successful task brought murmurs of admiration. "He's exceptional," one trainer said. "Driven, but gentle, like he knows what this work means. What none of them said aloud, but everyone felt, was that the dog seemed to be healing, as he learned. Each command was not just an order, it was an anchor, pulling him back from the shadows of memory. Sometimes, in the quiet moments between drills, Rex would glance toward the chain-link fence at the edge of the field. There, as regular as the morning sun, stood a little girl, smaller than before, but growing. She came after school, always the same way, backpack slung over one shoulder, sketchbook in hand. She never called out, never crossed the fence. She simply watched. At first, she'd been shy, uncertain if he still remembered her. The first time their eyes met, she froze. Then, Rex's ears perked, his head tilted, and his tail, cautious, almost hesitant, gave a single wag. She smiled, faint, trembling, a smile that carried the weight of all the tears she'd shed. From then on, she came every week. Sometimes she drew while she watched, pictures of him in uniform, or her grandmother baking cookies, or a family that existed only in her imagination, her mom, and Rex, sitting under the same roof again, safe. One afternoon, Harper noticed her at the fence and walked over. "You can come closer if you want," he said kindly. She shook her head. "No, sir. I don't want to distract him." Harper smiled faintly. "He's always known how to focus, but I think he works better when he knows you're here." She looked back at Rex, weaving through poles, jumping fences, tracking a planted scent. He moved with precision and grace, every muscle alive with purpose. The handler blew the whistle. "Good boy." Rex stopped and turned, tongue hanging out, eyes bright. He looked toward the fence again, straight at her. She raised her hand, waving softly. "Good boy, Rex." Something in her voice, that mix of love and longing, made him wag harder. The officers laughed quietly, and Harper's chest tightened. He'd seen hardened men fall apart in cases like this, but what he saw now was rarer, the first flicker of healing. Weeks passed. The air turned crisp with autumn. Rex earned his badge, a polished metal tag that gleamed against his black collar. The ceremony was small, just officers, trainers, and a few family members. Yet when Harper called his name, and the dog trotted forward to receive his vest, everyone clapped. "This," Harper said, voice rough with emotion, "is what it means to overcome. Rex isn't just part of our team, he's a symbol of resilience." Rex barked once, sharp and proud, as if he understood. From the back of the crowd, the little girl clapped too, a tiny replica of a police badge pinned to her jacket, a gift from Harper himself. After the ceremony, Harper led her closer. The handler nodded, loosening Rex's leash. "Go on," Harper said softly. The girl hesitated, then took a few steps forward. Rex froze, nose twitching. Then, with a low whine that turned into a happy bark, he bounded toward her. She laughed, the first true, unguarded laugh since that night, months ago. He stopped just before reaching her, lowering his head, remembering the quiet rules of gentleness, then nudged her hand. "Hi, Rex," she whispered, stroking his fur. "You did it. You're brave." Rex leaned into her touch, tail thumping softly against the ground. Around them, officers smiled and turned away, giving the two space to exist in their own little world. For a moment, everything stood still. The wind, the chatter, even time itself. It was just a girl and her dog, two survivors, who had found each other again, on the other side of loss. She knelt, wrapping her arms around his neck. "You're helping people now," she said softly. "Just like Grandma always said. Good hearts. Always protect." Rex pressed his head against her chest, eyes closing. In that embrace, something unspoken passed between them. Forgiveness, hope, and the quiet promise that neither of them would ever face darkness alone again. When she finally stood, Harper rested a hand on her shoulder. "You know, he's part of something bigger now," he said. "But he'll always be yours too." She nodded, smiling through tears. "I know." Rex barked once more, bright and clear, not the cry of pain from the courtroom, but the sound of purpose, of life reclaimed. The sun dipped low, casting long golden beams over the training field. The little girl waved one last time before leaving, her laughter echoing faintly as the gate closed behind her. Rex watched her go, tail wagging, then turned back toward his handler, ready for the next command, ready for the next mission. He was no longer just a witness to tragedy. He was a protector once more, and for the first time, in a long time, both he and the girl walked toward the future, not haunted by the past, but guided by it. The late spring sun bathed the town in gentle light, the kind that softened memories and made even old scars seem less visible. The local elementary school buzzed with excitement. Colorful banners waved in the breeze, reading, "Community Heroes Day, meet our police K-9 team." Children crowded the playground, laughter rippling through the air like wind chimes. Teachers herded them into neat rows, while parents stood along the fence, cameras ready. It was a day meant for joy, for safety, for stories of bravery told in cheerful tones. But for one little girl, standing near the back of the crowd, the day carried a heartbeat of something deeper, an ache that had learned how to smile. She was older now, taller, her hair neatly tied with a blue ribbon. In her hand, she still carried the same photograph of her grandmother, edges worn, colors faded. It wasn't sadness that made her bring it. It was love. Love that refused to disappear, even after everything. "All right, kids," the principal called through a microphone. "Let's welcome our special guests, the county's K-9 unit." The sound of applause filled the yard as 4 officers stepped forward, each with a dog at their side. Big, powerful, noble, yet one of them made the girl's breath catch in her throat. Rex. He looked magnificent now, sleek coat gleaming in the sun, posture proud, wearing his black K-9 vest with the silver tag that read, "Rex, Service Unit 12. His handler, Officer Daniels, walked beside him, with quiet authority. The children squealed with delight as the officers began their demonstration. They showed how the dogs could find hidden objects, follow scent trails, and protect their handlers. The crowd cheered, but the girl barely saw any of it. Her eyes never left Rex. He moved differently now, disciplined, confident, but the same soul shone in his eyes. That calm, golden-brown warmth she remembered, the same eyes that had watched over her in silence, that had seen both her fear and her courage. "Now," Officer Daniels announced, smiling, "we'll show you how our dogs work as protectors and partners." He gestured to Rex, who barked once in response. A deep, steady sound that carried across the playground. Children clapped and laughed, some even cheering his name. But among the noise, Rex's ears flicked toward a sound softer than all the rest. A faint, shaky breath. The girls. He froze. His head turned sharply toward the crowd, eyes scanning, searching. The world around him seemed to fade. No barking, no laughter, just instinct. And then, he saw her. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then his ears perked up, tail giving a tentative wag. A low whine escaped his throat, questioning, hopeful. Officer Daniels followed Rex's gaze, then looked toward the teacher beside the girl. She noticed, too, eyes softening. The girl's small hand clutched the fence tightly, tears glimmering as if the sunlight had found them. Daniels crouched beside Rex, murmuring something quietly, then nodded toward the girl. "Go on, boy." Rex needed no second invitation. He bounded forward, powerful yet graceful, closing the distance in seconds. The crowd gasped, then fell silent as the massive dog stopped just inches away from the fence, chest heaving, eyes locked on hers. The girl dropped to her knees on the other side, her hands reaching through the chain link. "Rex," she breathed, voice breaking. He pressed his muzzle against her fingers, tail wagging furiously now, whining softly as if he couldn't decide whether to bark or cry. The officers and teachers exchanged looks, and in that shared silence, they understood. This wasn't part of the demonstration. Daniels approached, opening the gate slowly. "Go ahead," he said gently to the girl. "He remembers you." She stepped forward, hesitant at first, then running the last few feet until she fell into his fur, wrapping her small arms around his neck. Her tears soaked into his coat. "Do you still remember me?" she whispered. "It's me, Rex. It's me." He licked her cheek. Once. Twice. Long, deliberate strokes of pure affection, and then leaned into her, letting out a deep, contented sigh. The crowd erupted into soft applause, some parents even wiping their eyes. The principal lowered the microphone, smiling through tears. "Looks like our hero found an old friend." Harper was there too, standing near the back as part of the invited guests. His chest tightened watching the scene unfold. He'd seen justice delivered in courtrooms, victories and losses. But this was different. This was healing, real, living proof that broken things could find their way back to wholeness. The girl pulled back slightly, cupping Rex's face in her small hands. "You look so brave," she said softly, smiling through tears. "Grandma would be so proud of you." Rex's tail thumped against the ground, steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Daniels walked over and knelt beside them. "He's been one of our best," he said gently. "But I think he's happiest right now." The girl looked up at him. "Can I visit him again?" The officer nodded. "As often as you like. You're part of his story, after all." She smiled, the kind of smile that lights up a room. Small, pure, fragile, but unbroken. The first true smile since that night, long ago. Rex barked once, almost as if echoing her joy. The sound drew laughter from the crowd. Children clapped, teachers cheered, and for a brief, shimmering moment, the weight of tragedy gave way to something brighter, the collective warmth of hope. As the event drew to a close, Daniels clipped Rex's leash but didn't pull. The dog turned one last time toward the girl, brushing his head against her arm. She bent down and whispered, "Go make them proud, okay?" He looked up at her, eyes steady, and barked softly in reply. The language of understanding that needed no words. Harper approached as the girl turned back toward the school steps. "You did good today," he said softly. She looked at him, sunlight catching the faint shimmer in her eyes. "We both did," she said, glancing back at Rex. The detective nodded, smiling. "Yeah, you both did." As Rex and the K-9 team departed, the girl stood at the gate, watching until the black van disappeared down the road. The sound of his bark lingered in the air, like a promise, a reminder that love, once real, never fades. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of spring blossoms. She looked down at the photo in her hand, her grandmother's gentle smile staring back. "He's okay now, Ba," she whispered softly. "We both are." And as the school bell rang in the distance, echoing through the courtyard, the little girl turned toward her classmates, walking with a lighter step. Behind her, the applause of 100 hearts still lingered, carried by the breeze, the quiet sound of healing, beginning at last. The autumn wind carried a chill through the open park, rustling the ribbons tied to the white memorial arch. Beneath the soft gray sky, rows of candles flickered, their small flames swaying in unison, tiny testaments of remembrance. The town had gathered for its annual memorial for victims of domestic violence, a solemn event where grief and healing met in the same breath. Near the front stood a teenage girl, tall and composed, though her eyes still carried the quiet depth of someone who had seen too much, too young. Her hair fell neatly over her shoulders, and in her hands, she held a folded piece of paper, a speech she had rewritten 100 times, yet somehow still didn't feel ready to read. Beside her sat Rex. The once young German shepherd was older now, muzzle dusted with gray, movements slower, but still steady. His black K-9 vest was polished, gleaming beneath the morning light. The badge on his collar caught the sunlight, flashing like a memory, refusing to fade. He lay close to her feet, watching the crowd with calm, vigilant eyes. Photographers hovered on the sidelines, reporters whispering into microphones. They all knew her story, the girl who found justice, with a dog by her side. But Anna, now 17, didn't come for headlines. She came because this was where the pain began, and where, perhaps, she could finally let it rest. Detective Harper, now retired, but still attending every year, stood among the audience. He nodded to her, a silent signal of support. She exhaled, unfolding the paper in her hands. The microphone crackled softly. "Good morning," she began, her voice gentle, but clear. "My name is Anna. When I was 5, I lost my grandmother to violence." A quiet wave rippled through the crowd. She paused, steadying her breathing. "For a long time, I thought justice meant punishment, catching the bad guy, making sure he couldn't hurt anyone again. But as I grew up, I learned something different. Justice isn't just about punishment. It's about remembering who we protect." Her words carried over the park, landing like small pebbles dropped into still water. She looked down at Rex, who lifted his head, eyes gleaming. "This is Rex," she continued, smiling faintly. "He was there that night. He saw things no living being should have to see. But he never gave up. He became a police dog, helped others, and showed me what strength really means." A murmur of admiration swept through the crowd. Cameras clicked quietly. Anna took a deep breath, her tone deepening with emotion. When I was a kid, I thought the world was broken beyond repair. But people like Detective Harper, Officer Daniels, and Rex showed me that broken things can be mended, not by forgetting, but by facing what hurts together. Her voice wavered, just slightly. Today, I stand here for my grandmother, for every person who didn't get the chance to speak, for every child still afraid to tell someone. I want them to know that silence is never the end of the story. There was a stillness that followed, one so complete, it felt sacred. The wind stilled, the candles burned steady, even the birds seemed to listen. Behind her, a police officer approached the podium, carrying a small velvet box. He opened it carefully, revealing a medal engraved with the K9 insignia and a single word beneath it: Valor. On behalf of the department, the officer said, we honor K9 Rex for his years of service, for bravery, loyalty, and his role in helping not just to protect, but to heal. The applause that followed wasn't loud. It was tender, human. The kind of sound that carried gratitude rather than noise. Anna knelt beside Rex as the medal was clipped gently onto his collar. He looked at her, head tilted, as if sensing the significance, but caring only for her presence. You earned this, she whispered, smiling through her tears. You've always been my hero. He wagged his tail once, slow, deliberate, before nudging her hand with his nose. A few rows back, Harper's throat tightened. He wiped a tear discreetly before glancing toward the sky. He could almost hear her grandmother's laughter again, faint and sweet, echoing from somewhere, far beyond the clouds. When the ceremony ended, people began to disperse. Some stayed behind, lighting candles, laying flowers along the memorial wall. Anna remained kneeling, her hand resting on Rex's back. The air smelled of autumn, dry leaves, candle wax, and rain. Anna knelt at the memorial wall, tracing her grandmother's engraved name. Grandma, she whispered, tears glistening. We did it. Rex rested his head on her knee, breathing softly. I wish you could see him, she murmured. He's still protecting people, just like you protected me. Candles flickered all around, hundreds of tiny flames glowing against the stone. Each one a story. Each one a victory. The wall no longer felt sorrowful. It felt alive, whispering, we're still here. A little girl approached, clutching a purple ribbon. Is he the hero dog? She asked. Anna smiled. He is. The child stroked Rex's fur, wide-eyed. He's soft. Watching her, Anna saw herself, once broken, now whole. When the children left, sunlight broke through the clouds. Detective Harper stepped closer. She's proud of you, he said softly. Anna nodded, voice trembling. I hope so. Rex barked once, strong, joyful, echoing across the park like a promise. Anna knelt beside him again. We did it, Grandma, she whispered. The wind carried her words away, part prayer, part farewell, all love. The sun sank low over the quiet town, sky painted in gold and rose. The streets that once echoed with sirens now shimmered in peace. On a small porch, at the edge of town, where her grandmother's house once stood, A young woman sat reading. Anna was 19 now, no longer the frightened child clutching her dog through nightmares. A silver pendant in the shape of a badge glinted at her neck, a gift from Detective Harper when she joined a local law enforcement program. Beside her lay Rex, old and gentle. His muzzle had turned gray, his breaths slow. The K9 vest was gone, replaced by a simple collar engraved with one word: Guardian. The porch creaked softly beneath the rhythm of time. Evening light settled across the garden. Somewhere beyond, children's laughter floated through the air. Anna smiled, turning a page. "You know, Rex," she said softly, "Professor Miller says I have an instinct for justice. You'd like him. Patient, serious, always watching." Rex's tail brushed the rug. She laughed quietly. "You've always been the quiet type." As dusk deepened, a familiar scent drifted through the air. Warm cookies, vanilla, and sugar. The kitchen was empty, yet the smell lingered like memory. Anna froze, then smiled faintly. "Grandma," she whispered, "you're here, aren't you?" Rex lifted his head, nose twitching toward the breeze. His cloudy eyes softened as he gazed at the fading light. Anna stroked his fur. "You can rest, old boy. You've done enough." She began reading again, her voice trembling. "Justice means standing where others fall, protecting what others overlook, and loving what the world forgets." The words wrapped around them, like a lullaby. The sky turned indigo. Stars flickered awake. Rex rested his head on her knee. His breathing slowed, deep, steady, peaceful. Anna pressed her forehead to his. "I love you," she whispered. "You were never just a dog. You were family." His tail wagged once more, before stilling. The world fell silent, not with sorrow, but with grace. For a long while she sat unmoving, tears glinting in the starlight. "You guarded not only a home," she whispered, "but a heart that refused to break." When the crickets began to sing, she rose and fetched a small wooden box. Inside, she placed Rex's collar beside her grandmother's photograph. "Now you can rest together," she said softly. The candle flickered, as if in answer. Outside, the porch lay empty. Starlight reflected off the window, like countless watchful eyes. A single dog barked in the distance, proud, bright, like a farewell salute. As dawn bloomed, Anna placed her hand over the photo and collar. "We're safe now," she whispered. And somewhere beyond the morning light, two souls, one human, one canine, kept their eternal watch over the girl who had finally found her way. In the end, stories like Rex's remind us why dogs, especially German shepherds, have always been more than pets. They're protectors, companions, and silent healers, who carry our pain without words and give back something we often forget how to give ourselves: unconditional love. If you've ever looked into your dog's eyes and felt they understood you more than anyone else, you already know the kind of bond I'm talking about. It's something sacred, something that deserves to be nurtured. If you'd like to explore a gentle, heart-centered way to understand your dog on a deeper level, their feelings, their loyalty, their quiet language, there's one I think you might really enjoy. You can take a look whenever it feels right. No rush, no pitch, just something worth your time. If you love your dog as much as they love you. Because at the end of the day, That love, that quiet, steady kind of love, is what truly makes us human.